What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and Parker Robbins, the Hood, gets the Infinity Gauntlet. And if you plan on or have read Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, which goes into Secret Wars 2015, the ending of this comic is probably one of the most important aspects of that entire run, or the beginning of that run. So what this does is this initially picks up in Attilan with Parker Robbins breaking into the Inhuman Royal City. Now, there's a couple things to know here. At this point in time, Black Bolt is dead, and Black Bolt, or at least was believed to be dead. And he was believed to be dead for two reasons. One, because Black Bolt sucks, right? So is anybody surprised that he would die? But number two, and the serious reason here, is this story takes place either during or immediately after a story called War of Kings and Realm of Kings. In effect, the Inhumans went to war against the brother of Cyclops, Vulcan, who had led the Shi'ar Empire at that point in time. That's a whole spacefaring escapade. That leads into like Thanos Imperative and the Cancerverse and all that kind of stuff where superheroes in a different reality can't die. We don't have to go into that. The biggest reason why I mention that is that's why Attilan is largely empty and almost completely unoccupied without Black Bolt there. But what ends up happening is Parker Robbins finds this kind of object hidden in a wall. Of course, he ends up cracking it open, and when he does, he finds the Reality Stone. Now, one of the things to know is that the Reality Stones are the Infinity Stones, Infinity Gems. It doesn't matter. You guys know what it is, right? Semantics. That the color of these relative to the power that they control has changed over the years in Marvel Comics. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see like the Reality Stone representing yellow here. And in a different story, it'll be a different color, right? It's just one of those things where it changes over time in Marvel. But in effect, the truth about this is that of all the Infinity Stones to have, the Reality Stone is the most powerful of the stones. Because while the Power Stone can amplify the abilities of stones, how do you really amplify the ability to alter reality on a universal scale, right? I mean, it's crazy what the stone can do. And so with the most powerful stone in his possession, he immediately seeks out the others. And the first place he goes to next is the Baxter Building. Now, at that point in time, Reed Richards is sleeping. The security systems remain unactivated because of Parker Robbins having the Infinity Stones. He does come across Ben Grimm, but he turns the floor to water, and Ben goes crashing down 34 floors until Parker Robbins is able to get to the safe where the stone is being held. Now, as a testament to the intelligence of Reed Richards here, what he had done with this stone, he'll basically go through and sort of rehash this to a degree, but what he had basically done was create a kind of microscopic universe, right? Like a pocket reality. And there's only one way in and one way out. Inside of this are a whole bunch of different objects that, for whatever reason, are important to him. So, for example, you see the helmet of Galactus from the storyline in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, as well as Mark Millar's run with like New World, right? So Galactus from the future is used as a time machine after he's killed and basically shows up in the modern era. There's a surfboard of the Silver Surfer and so on and so forth. But Parker Robbins takes the stone that Reed Richards has, which is the Power Stone. And having the two of these things in his possession, he immediately just kind of like teleports away, but ends up arriving out in the desert, right out in the middle of nowhere. And that's when he starts to realize the nature of the stones themselves. One of the things to know about Parker Robbins is this guy is, by and large, an exceedingly low-level villain. But at the same time, he's achieved insane levels of power, right? So he's had dealings with Dormammu, he's used the Norn Stones of Asgard, and the last time we saw the Norn Stones being manipulated in a significant way, Thor used them to become Rune King Thor, right? And like, became one of the most powerful beings in existence. And then Loki died, right, because of the Norn Stones, or at least using the Norn Stones during Siege. There were all kinds of things where Parker Robbins has attained these insane levels of power. It's nuts, right? He's just one of these weird, wonky characters that like you're not supposed to root for, but you kind of want to see him succeed. And so that's when he starts to figure out, okay, so you can't just like make a statement to the stones. You kind of have to coax them in a direction, right? So he's sort of learning how to use the stones as he wields them. What he doesn't expect is to come face to face with the Red Hulk. And this goes exactly the way that you would expect it to. Somebody wielding the power of the Power Stone is way beyond anything Red Hulk is capable of. Literally, this guy gets cold cocked. And in a scene reminiscent to the Silver Surfer crashing in to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum at the start of Infinity Gauntlet, Red Hulk comes crashing in to like the Avengers Watchtower. And it's just kind of like, what in the world happened? And he just says infinity. And so at that point, what ends up happening is that Iron Man calls together the Illuminati. Now, a little bit of history here for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with them. We'll make this super quick because I imagine by now most people are familiar with them. There was a great big huge conflict called the Kree-Skrull War. And while we don't have to go into the details of it, the reality is that it almost laid waste to Earth. And because Iron Man and Namor the Submariner and Professor Xavier and these guys were all part of the Kree-Skrull War conflict, but each one had a little piece of information that had they shared, they would have kept the conflict coming as close to Earth as it did. They decided to form the Illuminati, initially in Wakanda, where Black Panther rejected the idea, but they would effectively operate behind the scenes as a kind of hidden hand. So they're very different from the version that you saw in Doctor Strange 2, where they're more of like a kind of governing body for the world that they exist on. This one is incredibly hidden and always has been, but they end up calling in what's supposed to be Black Bolt, right? Another member of the group, but Medusa shows up instead because again, Black Bolt is believed to be dead. And initially it's just kind of like, where's Black Bolt at? And she's like, well, he's dead. And so Reed's just kind of like, I mean, that makes sense, right? Black Bolt sucks. No one's shocked by that. And so ultimately it's like, okay, what's going on here, right? And that's where Iron Man kind of spills the beans on what had gone down, that the Red Hulk had just been like sent crashing through Avengers Tower. But what actually ended up happening is that while he was already in the desert on a mission for Captain America, who at this point in time is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. after the events of Siege on Asgard, that the Red Hulk just kind of happened to come across Parker Robbins. He wasn't sent there. He wasn't seeking him out or anything like that. And Parker Robbins absolutely pummeled this guy. Now, the cool thing about this, and this is one of the amazing aspects of Red Hulk, right? Being General Thunderbolt Ross, that he is very capable when it comes to like multiple forms of combat, hand-to-hand combat, military strategy, all that kind of stuff. And so he knows when a guy can fight and he knows when a guy can't. And so when he came across Parker Robbins was just swinging at him, right, with everything he had. But there was no real finesse there. He wasn't capable when it came to hand-to-hand combat, i.e., it was Red Hulk figuring out Parker doesn't really know what he's doing. And the only upper hand that he had on him was the Power Stone, which he used to just clock the Red Hulk. And so as a result of that, the Red Hulk actually sought out the Avengers himself. So he wasn't sent flying across the world by Parker Robbins and crashing into the building or anything like that. But when he starts talking about the fact that Parker Robbins had like these two stones with him, different things like that, Iron Man immediately picks up on it, because one of the things to keep in mind about the Infinity Stones and the Infinity Gauntlet, 99.9% of the population doesn't know about them. They have no idea that they exist or what they're capable of. There are some members in the superhero community who do, if for no other reason than the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. But more often than not, an event that transpires and involves the Infinity Stones usually leads to some kind of like memory wipe or some sort of manipulation of the superheroes where they don't really seem to remember everything that happened after. And so the result of this is that Tony Stark takes off, but Captain America becomes suspicious because Tony Stark's saying things like, well, I need to check my information banks, my memory banks, I'll be back. And it's like, well, I mean, he can do that from here, right? And it's like, yeah. And so that's where Captain America's like, track him. He's going somewhere. Right, he's lying. And so ultimately when the Illuminati, or at least when we switch back over to the Illuminati, they're met by the arrival of Captain America and pretty much all of the new Avengers team, right? The new Avengers team, of course, the team that was formed after the events of Avengers Disassembled. So kind of a different roster, but pretty dope in terms of how it functioned. And so for a moment, what you do here, right? You actually kind of sidetrack away from what's happening in the here and now, and you pick up about a month beforehand. And over the course of this, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit, but a month before all of this transpired, the Hood was being held at the raft at Rikers Island. The reason being because the raft holds superpowered villains. But one of the things you learn is that the Hood's going to be transferred, right? He's going to be sent to a regular prison because he's depowered, right? He doesn't have the cloak of Dormammu anymore or anything like that. So he's just a regular dude. And because the raft is designed to hold superpower criminals, there's no sense in having him here because they need the room. That kind of ties into the nature of New Avengers as Bendis launched it, which is to say, there was a story called The Breakout, where basically all the villains from the raft escaped as kind of a lead up to Secret Invasion. They were freed by the villain Electro. And what this did is it led to the New Avengers forming as a way to basically hunt down all these escaped villains and then bringing them back to the raft, right? So that was kind of like the whole first story arc. It reintroduces the Sentry to Marvel and different things like that. I don't remember if we covered it. We probably did. We've done it for so long, but it probably couldn't hurt with being remastered if you guys are interested in it. But that's kind of how you get Parker Robbins essentially escaping. It's the way that it began, is he basically went to one of the guards and was like, look, man, I have all kinds of money. I can pay you whatever you need to be paid in order for your family to have a better life and for you to get me out of here, right? It's win-win. Now, he will escape seemingly by a different means, or at least learn about the Infinity Stones by a different means. But in the here and now, you basically have Captain America and his guys talking to Tony Stark like, what in the world is going on? Because Steve Rogers never knew that the Illuminati existed. And so initially, Iron Man's kind of skeptical, right, about dumping the information. But ultimately he does, right? He basically spills the beans on everything, right? We formed after the events of the Kree-Skrull War. We've been operating behind the scenes the entire time for years, and you never knew about us, that we share our information together, different things like that. But a lot of the threats that the world has faced has been stopped because of us, right? The Incredible Hulk and, yada, yada, yada. Even the Beyonder, right? When Bendis did that whole retcon of the Beyonder being a mutant and human hybrid, which Marvel's long since forgotten, thank God. But now that the cat's out of the box, they start revealing information, right? And they kind of start dumping the fact that someone is going around stealing Infinity Stones, and that if they get all the stones together, that person's going to be God, right? They'll be nigh unstoppable. Now, switching back over, right, to the story of Parker Robbins, which starts a month ago and ends about a week before all of this happens, that Parker Robbins had actually discovered and made friends with a guy by the name of Urtzia. Now, Urtzia on the surface just kind of seems like a dude, right? And apparently he killed some people. But as Parker Robbins starts to become friends with him, right, giving him like a birthday present because he missed his birthday, little things like that, that Urtzia starts to see him as an actual friend, to the point that Urtzia starts to reveal his story and essentially telling Parker Robbins that he's an Inhuman, and that before Black Bolt had basically perished, that he was a member of Black Bolt's inner circle, his most trusted advisor, and he kept the secrets of Black Bolt. And so this is how Parker Robbins learns that the Inhumans possess an Infinity Stone, and he learns about the nature of the Infinity Stones. Now, in terms of what the Infinity Stones can do, the whole big conversation that happens with Parker Robbins, that seemingly happens off panel, right? So us as the audience knowing about Infinity Stones, we can kind of read between the lines, but the actual escape moment comes when one of the guards shows up to Parker and is like, were you telling the truth about what you said, right? That you would give us a whole bunch of money or give me a whole bunch of money, whoever, if we got you out of here. And Parker's like, yes. And so ultimately the guards basically end up breaking him out. And so at that point, the Avengers, kind of switching back to the here and now, they come up with this plan, this strategy. And this is sort of a Bendis MO whenever it comes to stories that deal with the Illuminati, the Infinity Stones, somebody trying to capture them, because this is like the second time that he wrote a story like this, that what they end up doing is basically racing Parker Robbins, right? The idea is, okay, if Parker, or at least if this guy, they don't know that it's the Hood, if he's traveling around and stealing Infinity Stones, then let's just grab the other Infinity Stones before he does, right? And so that way he can't take them all. And the stones want to be together, right? So if you have one stone, it will lead you to the others. So in effect, they will lead us directly to him, and then we can confront him. They end up traveling to these various locations, right? The very deepest parts of Atlantis. There's sea monsters and serpents and stuff like that, right? This leads to like Nemo the Submariner grabbing his Infinity Stone. You have Professor Xavier and his group, which end up traveling to the ruins of Westchester, and they in turn end up going through this incredible Danger Room scenario. It's pretty cool, right? That the reality is, as most of you guys know, right, the Danger Room is a training ground for the X-Men. You can really rank it, or you can initiate programs with varying degrees of difficulty, right? Where a person who's learning how to use their powers for the first time may face off against members of like the Friends of Humanity, whereas Cyclops and the main X-Men team would like fight Apocalypse in the Danger Room or something along those lines. Well, because of how important the Infinity Stone is, and because of the fact that the Mind Stone can't just be given willy-nilly to anybody, and you can't just bury it in the backyard, that there is a Danger Room program that was built by Xavier that has all the villains of the X-Men, or at least all their deadliest villains. Magneto, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which includes Mastermind, Jason Wingard, right? The guy who manipulates all five senses. The Brood, which are like Marvel's version of Xenomorphs, right? From the Alien franchise with Sigourney Weaver. Apocalypse, the Sentinels, the whole nine yards, right? And that's the whole thing, is the program's difficulty is amped up to the maximum, meaning you can be killed here in this whole program. And so they're literally fighting for their lives and trying to make their way to the Mind Stone, which of course they ultimately end up doing. And so this transitions over to Iron Man and his team arriving in Area 51, which was at one point being used to hold Bruce Banner after the events of World War Hulk. Now, to kind of fill in the gaps, because I'm sure some of you guys are probably wondering where the Incredible Hulk is during all of this, I am pretty sure this story takes place during the Incredible Hulks, which was the story where Bruce Banner and his son Scar were dealing with Bruce Banner's other son that he never knew about, named Hero Kala. That dude was ridiculously OP. It was amazing. We do have like a whole Incredible Hulk playlist. It covers all that stuff. You're welcome to check it out at the end of this video if it's something that you're interested in. But in effect, the Incredible Hulk is off doing his own thing. So that's why he's not here. At least I'm pretty sure that's the case. The alternative is that it takes place during the whole Doctor Doom saga with the Incredible Hulk. But the fact is, right, they are here in this place that Iron Man had essentially bought Area 51 at some point in time. The problem is that once they arrive here, Parker Robbins is already there. He ends up immediately taking the Infinity Stone and then sends the Avengers away. But he ends up coming face to face as they all kind of teleport out with Hulk and, with Red Hulk and Thor. So they've all kind of been teleported to the same location, essentially. Now, the Watcher does appear, and the Watcher does what he always does. He just kind of like lingers in the background and offers some measure of a monologue. And while most of what he says isn't very important, there is something that he says here that is incredibly important. The reason being because Parker Robbins starts to take out all these guys. But most of you guys are kind of probably sitting here thinking, dude, you have the Reality Stone. Like, use the Reality Stone, man. Like, it's so easy to deal with most problems using the Reality Stone. Just snap your fingers and that's it. Well, the Watcher kind of comments on that, right? And says, a higher spirit would know that the gems make the physical mortal body a secondary concern, that he need not struggle to keep hold of the gems, that all he need do is will them to his command. All he would need to do is will the Hulk to not exist. Parker is a naive fool in over his head, and that is why all he can think to do now is struggle. That is why all he can think to do is fight, the power of a god, and all he can think to do is fight. But what Parker Robbins doesn't know about this Red Hulk, what almost no one knows, is that Red Hulk is a repentant soul. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that when Thunderbolt Ross initially emerged as a Red Hulk, he was by all rights a villain, right? You would consider him a villain, I would consider him a villain, right? And he like set himself up at the White House at one point and wanted to like dominate the world. And your mileage may vary on whether or not you thought those story arcs were very good at all. But the fact is, right, that he's kind of trying to atone for all of his past misdeeds as a Red Hulk, right? Trying to find some measure of redemption. The cool thing about this is that because Parker Robbins is not really the sharpest tool in the shed, instead, it's really more luck, truth to tell, where this guy just kind of finds himself in these situations, right, by hook or by crook, where he's able to attain these insane levels of power that he just doesn't know what he's doing. And so Red Hulk actually ended up taking the Power Stone from Parker without Parker realizing it. And so there's like this huge knockdown, drag out fight between all these guys. Now, of course, it does also involve Thor, who has a stone as well. They're doing what they can. But the reality here is that going against someone, even just wielding the Reality Stone, is no small thing. And so they all end up charging at Parker, right? When all the Avengers show up on the scene, but Parker ultimately just teleports away. And when that happens, he's again learning to use the stones. And so that's when he starts to realize he's not really being sent anywhere by the stones. He's being pulled to places by the stones. And in fact, he's being pulled to other stones. So when Xavier and his guys get through the entire Danger Room protocol and finally get access to the Mind Stone, Parker's there and he teleports away. And so it's this really, really interesting scenario because initially, before he teleports away, Xavier tries to use his telepathy to bring Parker down and subdue him. Now, it's not the first time that Xavier's done that. And in fact, during the Illuminati miniseries, I think it was, by Brian Michael Bendis, there's a point where Reed Richards assembles the Infinity Gauntlet and he's intoxicated by its power and he doesn't want to let it go. He's just kind of like, I mean, I could, but it's like the One Ring, right, from Lord of the Rings. It's like, man, like the power speaks to me, right? And so Xavier uses his telepathy to subtly manipulate Reed Richards into not wanting the Infinity Gauntlet. And Reed ends up disassembling it, putting it away, and each of the stones were given to each member of the Illuminati, which kind of goes into this story, right? Parker Robbins breaking into their locations and stealing the stones away. Now, of course, Xavier loses, right? Given the level of power that Parker has. That's kind of the irony here. And the Watcher comments on that, right? Parker doesn't know what he's doing. So Xavier losing to Parker has less to do with Parker Robbins manipulating the Mind Stone and has more to do with the fact that the Mind Stone is just sort of protecting Parker of its own accord, right? It's just its form and function, right? You crash into a brick wall. The brick wall didn't defeat you. It's a brick wall, right? I mean, it just, it's what it does. It stops things. So again, it's kind of cool because what Parker ends up doing is that with the stones, which at this point he has the Reality Stone, the Mind Stone, and the Space Stone, that he actually ends up teleporting. And with these 3 stones, right, with just these 3 stones at his disposal, he can rend the entire universe asunder, right? The minds of all sentient beings across the universe are his to manipulate. He can travel anywhere through the universe instantaneously, and he can control the physical form of the universe. But the Watcher has this really cool moment where he says, when it comes to the Infinity Stones, that Parker is not the only person hunting for them. There are always others. And Thanos appears to Parker Robbins. Now, this is cool, right? Because Thanos is in possession of the Soul Stone. And now here's a really cool thing, right? Because when the two of them start talking, Thanos tells him, he's like, I am Thanos, the master of death. I have an offer for you, Parker Robbins. You seek that which is mine, Parker. It's insulting to think that I would not know who you are by now, right? Because Parker's like, who are you? Or like, how do you know my name? Right? That kind of thing. And so literally Thanos just says, the Infinity Gems, they belong to me. And so literally he tells him, like, hand them over. And initially Parker's just like, I mean, I could just keep the stones for myself and assemble the Infinity Gauntlet and control all of reality. But that's when Thanos is like, no human has ever held the gems together. No human has ever worn the Infinity Gauntlet that combines them. The power you seek is more than your form can withstand. If you attempt this quest any further, you will simply cease to be. It is not a threat. These are simply the facts of existence. You will cease to exist. Now, right off the bat, Thanos is either lying or he doesn't know that Reed Richards had wielded the Infinity Gauntlet at one point in time. It's far more believable that he just didn't know that Reed had the Infinity Gauntlet in his possession. I mean, they were literally in like a dingy basement, right? When like Reed has the gauntlet, right? I mean, it's not like they're standing out there in the middle of New York City. It's like, I have the gauntlet, it's just kind of hidden away. But Parker's like, okay, so like, if I were to give you these stones, what's in it for me? Right? Like, I mean, what do I get out of this outside of surrendering basically the power of godhood? And the response of Thanos is, I intend to recreate existence, right? I mean, that's what I do. Truth to tell, man, it's my thing. He's like, but I will basically give you everything you want in this new universe that I would create, right? I would give you everything that you would need in order to live a fulfilling life. And so that's where Parker's just kind of like, where are you from? Right? And Thanos is like, nowhere that you would know. And he was like, I wonder if they have poker there. And Thanos is like, why? And he's like, because you have a terrible poker face. Because he realizes it's an illusion. It was Doctor Strange masquerading as Thanos using an illusion spell from the Book of Ashanti. At that point, the other Avengers just come running in as fast as they can. Red Hulk, having the Power Stone, absolutely starts pummeling Parker Robbins. Now, he does seem to lose some of the stones, but he has the Reality Stone at his disposal. And this is where things get intriguing. Those of you guys who saw What If Season 1, where Ultron had the Infinity Gauntlet and was jumping through a whole bunch of universes, it seems like Marvel Studios was drawing off of this particular run from Brian Michael Bendis and Parker Robbins. Because as Parker and Red Hulk fight each other, it seems like they're jumping through realities. Now, we don't really have a lot of context here. It's really more the background images that we get, because the foreground is just the dirt being smashed, right? Either that or Parker's just like using the Reality Stone and shifting reality around them. But whatever the case is, they seem to pass through varying dimensions. So for example, they pass through the zombie universe. They pass through the House of M reality. They pass through a universe where Hyperion controlled everything, right? They just keep jumping from one universe to the next. That seems to be the case anyway. The alternative is that Parker Robbins, drawing on knowledge of events that he seemingly has no memory of, right, that he wasn't a part of, so it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, that he's actually like bringing these things into fruition. But regardless of which way you try to slice it, the result here is that as the fight goes on, that Parker gets the upper hand on Red Hulk. And he's just like, give me the Power Stone, right? Or I will wipe you from existence. Enough is enough. I'm tired of these games, right? And so ultimately, like, Red Hulk's just like, okay, fine. And he holds out his hands and there's no Power Stone in his hand. He was like, you just had the Power Stone, right? And like, Red Hulk's like, well, guess who has it now? He's like, come on, just take a guess. And he's just like, I will find out myself. So he turns around and like Iron Man has the fully assembled Infinity Gauntlet. And Parker's like, no, that's ridiculous. I have the Reality Stone in my hand, only for it to turn out and be an illusion, right? That was created by Iron Man. And so at that point, Iron Man holds the power of God in his hand. It's the most powerful Iron Man has ever been in the history of Marvel Comics. And it's this moment, well, the only exception to that might be during Christopher Cantwell's run, when he got the power cosmic. But the Infinity Gauntlet's way beyond the power cosmic, right? So, yeah, it's the most powerful Iron Man's ever been. But there's this point where he's almost kind of intoxicated the same way Reed was. Like, I can create a world without war, right? I can make a world without alcohol or drugs. There's no hate or jealousy, but that wouldn't be the world that we live in, right? Which is kind of the point, right? Like, we're making the world not the world we live in. It would be better than the world we live in. I mean, you really want to stay living in this world, Iron Man? The Marvel Universe is pretty rough. But the fact is, right, that it's really more of even Iron Man's own redemption story. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that while they were always kind of subtle background plot threads, ever since Civil War, Iron Man has always kind of like tried to atone for having the Superhuman Registration Act passed and all that kind of stuff. Now, by this point in Marvel, right, when this story is written, the Superhuman Registration Act is all done and gone, right? Like Captain America's director of S.H.I.E.L.D., one of the prerequisites for him to take that role was that like the events of Civil War would basically be removed. There's no registration required of superheroes or anything like that. So that era of Marvel went away. And so it's kind of Iron Man trying to demonstrate, both to himself and even Captain America and the other Avengers, he's not the guy that he used to be. He's not going to enforce his will on the world around him. So he's like, I could do anything with the gauntlet, but there's only two things that I'm going to do. The first is that I'm going to put you back where you belong. And he sends Parker Robbins back to his prison cell. And the second thing he says is, I'm going to use the stones to destroy the stones, right? That's really the only option here, given how dangerous these things are. And so literally the stones vanish, right? And that's it. And like, they simply just cease to be. And so Iron Man leaves, right? Iron Man walks away, and ultimately Captain America congratulates Red Hulk on everything that happened, right? The fact that he's kind of redeemed himself, and he's like, you acted like an Avenger, man. Like, I know you've been like a really crappy guy in the past, and you've done some really, really crappy stuff, but you laid your life on the line, not just for your other teammates here, but for the world, right? Welcome to the Avengers. You put other people before yourself, and that's what we do. And so you switch back over to Iron Man. And as you would expect, he never got rid of the Infinity Gauntlet, but this is where things become incredibly important, guys. Because if you're reading Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers going into Secret Wars, this ending is wildly important, because what they end up doing is where the revelation is made by Tony Stark that he didn't destroy the stones. The question's why. And it's like, well, because the stones represent the fundamental forces of the universe. We don't know what would have happened if we had destroyed the Infinity Stones. We could have wiped out our whole universe in the process. There's no way to know. And because there's no way to know, it's too big of a risk worth taking. The universe would have responded somehow. And so they're like, okay, let's do what we came here to do, right? Everybody gets an Infinity Stone. Now, as you guys know, there are 6 stones, but there are 5 people here. And so that's where Iron Man's like, now you see why we do this. Now you see that there are just some things not for public consumption. There are things that we have to take care of quietly. Some things the world, even the Avengers, are better off not knowing about. And that's when you switch over to Captain America and he says, okay, Tony, I'm with you. I'm in. But let's all try to find better hiding places this time. Because if you read Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, it opens up with Black Panther reforming the Illuminati and Captain America's there. This is how he gets there. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.